Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 25th of September of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. But before we start, I would like to share with you one important thing. First of all, we shouldn't expect significant progress on the ground during the next 24 hours. We shouldn't expect any updates, any changes from deep state pro-Ukrainian sources map. Maybe they will show us something, but they're not going to show us huge advance of the armored force of Russian Federation if this advance exists. And the thing is that currently Zelensky in New York, and he needs these 24 hours to complete his meeting with the President of the United States of America, Joe Biden, and to provide him his victory plan. And for these purposes, he needs to hold the lines as long as possible. He needs the Ukrainians to hold Vuhledar. He needs everything to show that situation is stable, the Ukrainians are not losing, and the Ukrainians are able to do everything they want if the United States of America provide them additional weapon. As for the meeting during these events in New York, Zelensky had already meeting with Olaf Scholz, and we know that Olaf Scholz have already changed his opinion about the special military operation. Now Scholz says that it's time to begin peace talks and something like this. As for the president of Czech Republic, he also says that Kiev needs to accept that part of Ukrainian territory will temporarily be under Russian occupation even if the war comes to end. This is his words. Also, he stated that if Ukraine is able to win Russia but to lose half of population, we can't call this as victory. Now let's talk about the situation on the ground, and first we're going to talk, of course, about the South Donetsk direction, about the Russian offensive operation in the direction of Vuhledar. And obviously this is, as I understand, fifth attempt from the Russian side to take under control this stronghold, and most likely this is the last attempt, the last assault of the city by the name of Vuhledar. Now let's go to flanks. First we're going to talk about the western flank, and according to information we have, during the previous 24 hours the Russians managed to improve their positions to the north of the village by the name of Perechistovka by crossing the river of Kashlagach. This is very important progress because the Ukrainians are saying that the Russians still haven't finished the battle for Vuhledar, but now the Russians have already begun the preparation for further movements in the direction of Bagayavlenka. So a lot of military experts are saying that this is exactly the way how the Russians are going to move, not even in the direction of Novoukrayinka, but through the fields in the direction of Bagayavlenka. As for Novoukrayinka, during the previous 24 hours we received just one video of how the Russians were FPV droning the edge Ukrainian positions to the south of the village. This video confirms that the edge Ukrainian positions. Now let's move further and let's talk about the eastern flank. According to information we have, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the over the coal mine South Donbas number 3. And this video was published yesterday in the evening, and I call these things as a flag attack. So the Russians began their special mental psycho operation by the name of flag attack. And the main goal of this operation, flag attack, to publish as many as possible videos with the Russian flags raised all over the entire line of combat contact, with the purpose to ruin the meeting between Zelensky and Biden, between Zelensky and his sponsors from the Western countries. Of course, all these videos of this type will have some effect on Zelensky and of course on his partners and his sponsors. Once again, in this video we can see how the Russian soldiers raised the flag in the most northwestern part of the stronghold. Significant number of flags, not just of Russian country, but also of different Russian units that were involved in this South Donbas and this offensive operation of coal mine South Donbas number 3. Furthermore, we have additional reports how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions in the tree lines to the west of the mine. So this video confirms that Ukrainians most likely abandoned their positions in the mine, but they haven't retreated very far towards the, let's say, Bagayavlenka itself. The Ukrainians moved to the next defense belt to this tree line. I'll remind you that just 3 days ago, on the 23rd of September, we got the video how the Ukrainians were retreating. This video show us the last episodes, the last seconds of the Ukrainians in the western part, the northwestern part of the mine. The Ukrainians were waiting for some order. Probably the reconnaissance or intelligence was working to confirm that they can move. Most likely they received permission to cross the fields, and the Ukrainians left the northwestern part of the mine completely. So this is the video, but when the Ukrainians crossed, they were attacked by the Russian FPV drones. Anyway, as you can see, the Ukrainians currently try to hold their positions along this tree line, but it's very difficult to hold positions along this tree line because the Russians are very close to these positions, first of all, and the most important, the Russians control high-rise building constructions, and the Russians can see this defense belt very clear, and they can destroy everything inside of this. So most likely the Ukrainians during the next few days will be forced to abandon their positions towards Bogayavlenka. And furthermore, the Ukrainians began already doing this. During the previous 24 hours, we got lots of videos of how the Russians were FPV droning and attacking the Ukrainian forces exactly along this road. Most of these attacks were how the Ukrainians were bringing additional vehicles for rotation, but the Russians were attacking them and destroying. Now let's talk about the city, the stronghold of Vuhledar itself. As you can see, we have lots of geolocations, a lot of icons, a lot of posts, but the most important are coming, of course, from the eastern part, from this territory. We have two geolocations that confirm complete or control of the eastern part of the stronghold of Vuhledar. And for example, in this video, in the first part of this video, we can see how the Russians were bombing and attacking the territory of the city. And as you can see, the Russians from one side are attacking the city, but on the other side, the Russians at the same time conducting offensive operation, which is very dangerous. And this video and this situation confirms that most likely the Russians also have the order from Putin, from military authorities of the Russian Federation, that they need to complete the battle for Vuhledar before the meeting between Zelensky and Joe Biden, or at least the Russians need to get as deep as possible on the territory of the city and to raise the flag, which can mean that most likely 50, 60 or even more percent of this small area was already captured by the Russians. So in this video we can see a very heavy artillery preparation, a lot of fire anomalies, and in the second part, in the final part of the video, we can see Russian soldiers that were moving on the territory of Vuhledar from the eastern part. So exactly in this moment we can see two Russian troopers that entered the building. So the Russians entered this building in the video. Later we got additional video also from eastern part of Vuhledar, another batch of episodes of how the Russians were bombing and attacking the city, and then in the second part of the video we can see additional group of Russian forces that were moving between buildings in the eastern part. So this is the situation, and this is like 100% confirmation that the Russians entered the territory of this stronghold. Now, and we received this information yesterday late in the evening after we finished with the previous video, and during the day we got additional updates, and let's discuss them. According to pro-Russian sources, as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to enter the north and the northeastern part of Vuhledar, and the Russians continue advancing. So once again, according to some pro-Russian sources, there is a movement exactly in this direction of the armed force of Russian Federation. Also, according to another pro-Russian source, we have additional progress on the ground in the southern and the southeastern part of Vuhledar. So once again, according to different mappers, pro-Russian mappers, there is additional progress on the ground in this direction. Summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that by the evening of the 25th of September, the Russians have already established complete control over this part, or at least the Russians established something like almost physical and complete fire control over this territory, which is very important. Now let's discuss in details. When talking about the southern direction, we understand that the Russians are moving along Magistralny Street just with one purpose. The Russians need to improve their logistics, they need to improve the roads between Vuhledar and the village of Mykolska and the village of Pavlovka, and the best way to move additional forces, reserves and reinforcements is to use this road. But the Russians now can't do this because the Ukrainians from the southern part of Vuhledar can attack the Russians from high-rise building, let's say with anti-tank missiles, with drones, with a lot of different weapons, lots of different equipment equipment. So that's why the Russians are trying to move here and to secure the first line of buildings, and this will allow the Russians to improve their logistic. As for the northern direction, the Russians are moving in the northern part with the purpose to reach the last line, the last street of Vuhledar, and if the Russians are able to take under control and to get here, then the Russians will be able to create complete encirclement of Vuhledar, because from this point of the northern Vuhledar, the Russians will be able to cut everything and to establish complete control over this line. So everything that Ukrainians will use, everything that will use this road for evacuation, obviously will get under complete Russian FPV artillery or anti-tank fire and will be destroyed. As for the geolocations about control, for example, in this video that was published by the Russian sources, we can see abandoned Ukrainian vehicle. Maybe the Ukrainians arrived in this area for rotation, maybe they brought some equipment. Currently it's very difficult to understand, but the Russians destroyed this vehicle as a result of FPV drone attack. Furthermore, in this part of Vuhledar, we can see the rotation process of the armored forces of Ukraine. Another personal carrier arrived in the western part of Vuhledar, but this carrier was discovered by the Russians and destroyed with FPV drones, which confirms that Ukrainians most likely they don't have any more possibilities to evacuate, to escape the encirclement and to evacuate personnel from the citadel without suffering significant losses. Furthermore, during the previous 24 hours, the Western media published the interview with a soldier or officer or commander of the 72nd Mechanized Brigade, which is responsible for defense of this stronghold. And according to him, to this officer, currently, or at least at the beginning of the final storm of Vuhledar, there were around 2,000 soldiers on the territory of the stronghold. Of course, we are not saying that every single soldier from these 2,000 belongs to 72nd Mechanized, but obviously 1,500 may belong to this unit. And if this information is correct, then we can make a conclusion that Ukrainians are going to lose the most powerful, the most experienced unit in their army, and we are talking about the 72nd Mechanized Brigade, and this is a complete disaster. Furthermore, most likely the Russians will try to capture the soldiers of this 72nd Brigade because they have a lot of things to do with them due to failed 4 attempts in the past while the Russians were attacking the city in 2022 and 2023. Now let's move further. Let's talk a little bit about Katerinovka direction. Right before we start making the video, the pro-Ukrainian sources reported about additional progress on the ground by the armored forces of Russian Federation. As a result of clashes, the Russians took under control additional tree line to the south of the village by the name of Katerinovka. So the Russians are moving and getting closer and closer, and the main purpose for the Russians is to establish complete FPV drone control from the southern part and to get as close as possible to the main supply roads of this village. Now let's move to the Kurakhove direction. We have lots of geolocations, as you can see, so let's start from the beginning, and the most important updates are coming from the Nivoyskoye cauldron. Pro-Ukrainian and neutral mappers reported that the Ukrainians left fields completely. They abandoned their positions, and the Russians, as a result of advance, managed to take under control lost Ukrainian positions. So this is very important because as a result of this progress, the Russians managed to maintain the line of combat contact, and the most important, to release forces that can be used for additional progress, let's say in the vicinity of Maximilianovka or in the village of Ostraya or further in the western direction towards Ostrivskaya. As for this part, today the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported and confirmed that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the village of Ostraya and to secure this territory completely. This is very important because according to different mappers, the Russians managed to move even further in the western direction, and currently the edge Russian positions are located on the territory of the Selidovska prison number 82, and the released forces from Nivoyskoye cauldron can reinforce Russian positions in this part, and from this territory the Russians can begin offensive in the direction of Alexandropol, the Russians can begin offensive towards Astrivske, and of course the Russians can complete the battle for Maximilianovka and then to move towards the city of Kurakhove. City of Kurakhove currently is very important stronghold, and we start receiving first updates from this territory as well. Let's take a look at these icons, and these icons are very important. In this video we can see a number of Russian FPV drone attacks on Ukrainian vehicles that were moving along the main street from the east to the west, and this video is very important because these are the first cases since the beginning of the special military operation when the Russians were attacking vehicles, Ukrainian military personnel and equipment on the territory of Kurakhove with the use of a regular FPV drone. So these are first cases, and this is very important because we remember the most important rule of the Russian offensive in the Pokrovsk direction, where the Russian drones are moving in the same direction, the Russian forces are moving as well. So which means that if the Russians began attacking the Ukrainians in Kurakhove, this means that in the very near future we're going to see activization and intensifying of actions in Russian offensive operations on the line Maximilianovka, Georgievka, Maximilianovka, Kurakhove, and Ostraya, Prison 82, and further in the western direction to Kurakhove as well. And obviously this is going to happen very soon. Now let's talk about the northern direction. We have a lot of updates from the area to the west of Vovchansk. According to geolocation we received during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions along the railways between the city of Selidova and the village of Tsukuryne. This is very important video because yesterday we got a video of the same type, how the Russians brought additional forces to the same area. And this video confirms that the Russians currently are concentrating significant number of forces exactly in this forest. And now the Russians, after the number of forces gets the critical number, the Russians will have possibilities to choose where to move further, in the southern direction towards the village of Tsukuryne or in the northern direction towards the city of Selidova. So significant concentration of forces we can see right now along these railways. Now let's talk about the northern flank. According to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions and to maintain the line of combat contact between the mine of Selidovska and the village of Mikhailovka. This is very important because the Russians are tightening their news around the city of Selidova. Now let's talk about Tsukuryne. We have additional updates from this territory. First of all, let's take a look at this picture. In this picture we can see a fire anomalies in the northeastern part of Tsukuryne, and also we can see additional fire anomaly to the east of Tsukuryne in this stronghold, which confirms that currently there are very heavy clashes exactly for the northeastern part of this village and for this stronghold. Furthermore, according to different mappers, the Russians during the previous night, by the beginning of the 25th of September, managed to reach and to maintain the lines between the stronghold, and different pro-Russian sources today reported that as a result of clashes the Russians managed to establish complete control over these strongholds. So basically during the previous 3 days the Russians managed to capture all these three strongholds between the village of Tsukuryne, Ukrainsk and the mine. So all these strongholds were captured, and now the Russians have a clear and safe road further towards this village, and most likely during the next 24 hours we're gonna start receiving first updates about the beginning of clashes on the territory of Tsukuryne, which is very important. If the Russians are able to take this territory under complete control, then the situation for the Ukrainians is going to be much worse than it is right now. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Pokrovsk direction. Today we have additional changes on the ground according to different mappers on the line between Krutoy Yar and Nikolaevka. According to pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians managed to improve their positions between the mine of Novgorodovskaya the second or the third and the village of Zhuravka, and according to different pro-Russian reliable sources, as a result of clashes the Russians also established complete control over the village of Nikolaevka and over the village of Krasny Yar. So by these improvements the Russians managed to maintain the lines and to reach the dense network of the fortifications between the city of Pokrovsk and the Russian positions. As you can see, there are significant number of strongholds that Ukrainians are holding And this is the only base. This is the only base the Ukrainians defense belt. The Ukrainians realize their defense of the city of Pokrovsk and Pokrovsk agglomeration. If the Russians are able to break through this defense belt, then we can start counting days, at least when Myrnohrad is going to fall. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Toretsk direction. And during the previous 24 hours, as you can see, we haven't received anything. Yesterday, we haven't received anything as well. So we haven't been receiving anything for the previous 2 days. And this is very important, and this is even more louder, more important than receiving significant number of updates. The last update, important update we received from the Toretsk direction, dated on the 23rd of September, and we had just 2 icons on the 23rd of September. The first one was a report that the Russians captured and took under control the landfill of Nova, and we got the video published by the Ukrainian sources of how they were destroying the biggest construction on the territory of the mine Tsukuryne. This is very important video, and we already discussed this, and we made the conclusion that usually forces destroy mine when they control the territory only in case of soon retreat or withdrawing positions. So most likely due to complete absence of any updates for 24th and 25th of September, most likely the situation for the Ukrainians in this direction is very critical and very bad. And once again, very likely tomorrow or the day after, I believe tomorrow, right before Zelensky begins his meeting with Joe Biden, the Russians will provide significant number of flags. So they're going to be another flag attack from the Russian side, and we will be forced, we will challenge this territory under complete Russian control. Now let's move further. As for the Toretsk direction, we haven't received anything special, just regular Russian artillery in the northern part of the Chasiv Yar. The Russians are bombing and attacking this territory heavily, preparing this foothold before upcoming Russian offensive operation. As for the Siversk direction, as you can see, we have significant number of artillery strikes. The Russians, as usually, are bombing the city of Siversk itself. The Russians are bombing the Ukrainian positions in the vicinity of Grigorovka, and the Russians are bombing the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine in the area of Serebryanka. So the same story that we saw a month and a year ago. Nothing special, nothing new. Now let's move to the south in Kupiansk direction. The Russians managed to improve their positions. It's better to say that we turned contested area into territory of Russian control based on the video that was published by the 66th Mechanized Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine. In this video we can see number of strikes on Russian vehicles along the road between Nivoyskaya and Makeivka, and based on this video we have adjusted some part in Russian favor. Now let's talk about the northern Kupiansk direction. The situation for the Ukrainians in this part is getting worse and worse. The Russians currently have 3 directions of attack. The first direction goes from Pishane in the southwest towards Krugliakovka, and from Krugliakovka in the southeast towards Lazovo. This is the first Russian roads of attack, and today, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position a little bit further. Furthermore, the Russians are saying that they began another offensive operation on the line between the village of Berestova and Lazovo itself, and as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to improve their positions, but yet we haven't received any updates how exactly the Russians managed to improve the configuration of the line of combat contact. And the Russians are moving from Pishane towards the village of Pishane, northern Pishane, with the small hook down to Stepovo Novoselovka, with the purpose to create another cauldron in this part. And as a result of small offensive, the Russians managed to improve their positions, and we have video published by the Ukrainian forces that confirms additional progress on the ground. In this video we can see Ukrainian FPV drone that was droning the Russian forces, bombing the Russian forces exactly in this point. Now let's move further and let's talk about Vovchansk direction, where the Ukrainians continue their counter-offensive operation, and during the previous 24 hours the Ukrainians managed to restore control over additional block in the southern part of the northern Vovchansk. We have colored this block in Ukrainian favor based on this video. In this video we can see how the Russians were bombing and attacking exactly this block, and this is the only evidence of Ukrainian presence in this point. And today the group of forces north also confirmed that as a result of clashes the Russians were forced to fall back from the aggregate plant, and the reason why the Russians retreat is that the situation is already become critical critical due to complete absence of any defense constructions or any strong constructions that can be used as defense belt. And we can understand this because, for example, in this video we can see everything clearly. As you can see, the northern part of Vovchansk was reduced completely till ruins. In some places was completely reduced till dust, and obviously there are no places not just to hold positions on the aggregate plant. It's very difficult to bring additional reinforcements and reserves through this desert. So that's why the Russians decided to retreat, and for now it's very difficult to understand where exactly the Russians are going to stop the Ukrainians, because if the Russians are not going to hold this desert, obviously the Ukrainians will do everything they can to restore control over even desert and over ruins, just to show additional media victory. So we expect additional progress on the ground by the armed forces of Ukraine and additional retreats of the Russians towards the north. Furthermore, the Russian sources published the video on how they were bombing and toss flamethrowering the Ukrainian positions on the territory of the aggregate plant. Yesterday we got the video how the Ukrainians secured this territory, and now the Russians sent additional hello to the Ukrainians exactly in this point. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Kursk direction, where the Ukrainians continue their own offensive and the Russians continue their own. As you can see, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything. I'm talking about significant changes on the ground, just small advance of the armed forces of Russian Federation on the line Spalnaya, Borki, further in the western direction to Kurakhove. So this information was provided us by different reliable mappers, and also we have additional changes on the ground in Ukrainian favor on the territory of the village of Volgovka. In this video we can see several artillery strikes on Ukrainian positions in this village. Recently this territory was colored in Russian favor according to different mappers, but now we see that most likely the Ukrainians either counterattack and restored positions, or the reports from reliable mappers were wrong about the village of Volgovka. Furthermore, as you can see, we have significant number of artillery strikes between the village of Malaya Loknya and the village of Staraya Porechnya, which confirms significant concentration of Ukrainian forces and that the Russians are preparing this foothold before upcoming counteroffensive in this part. Today we got additional reports from very reliable and very powerful Russian military authorities officers. They reported that in the very near future the Sudzha salient will be cut by the Russians completely, and the Russians will restore control over the territories along the border. Now let's talk about Glishkova offensive. The Ukrainians stopped completely. They tried to show some results before the beginning of the meeting between Biden and Zelensky, but as a result of last attack, they lost additional batch of forces, a significant number of Western equipment and vehicles, and the Ukrainians stopped completely. Most likely within the next few days, the Ukrainians will retreat from this territory towards the border and without any progress on the ground at all. The Russians for now are not counterattacking. They are working just with artillery, dealing significant damage to the Ukrainians. They're waiting, and when they see Ukrainians begin retreat, the Russians will most likely attack. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes to my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.